If you're new, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. It only takes a second, but it motivates us to create more stories, so please like this video. And now, let's start the story. I never thought my life would take such a turn. If someone had told me years ago that I'd be sitting here now, burdened with guilt, recounting a story I wish had never happened, I would have called them a liar. But life has a strange way of unfolding, and now I can't escape the truth. This is my confession, my attempt at making sense of the choices I made, choices that shattered my world and the world of those I love. It all started so innocently. My brother Ryan and I had always been close. We grew up as best friends, sharing secrets, dreams, and even our worst fears. He was older than me by 3 years, the responsible one, the one who always had his life together. When he married Sophie, I was thrilled for him. Sophie was warm, kind, and deeply in love with my brother. They seemed perfect together, the kind of couple everyone admired. At the time, I was married to Mark, a man who by all accounts was a good husband. We had been together for 6 years, and while our marriage wasn't perfect, it was stable. We had our share of ups and downs, but I never thought I would be capable of betraying him. I never thought I would betray my own brother. But sometimes, life isn't about what you think you would do. It's about what you actually do when faced with the unexpected. It all began during a difficult phase in my marriage. Mark and I had been struggling. We had grown distant, caught up in the monotony of everyday life. Conversations had become routine, affection had dwindled, and there was an unspoken tension between us that neither of us could address. It wasn't that we didn't love each other. We had just stopped trying. Around that time, Ryan and Sophie moved to a new city due to Sophie's job. They visited occasionally, and during one such visit, I found myself talking to Ryan more than usual. He had always been easy to talk to, but this time it felt different. We weren't just engaging in small talk. We were confiding in each other. "I love Sophie," he said one evening as we sat on the back porch after a family dinner. "But sometimes I feel like she's so caught up in being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, that she forgets about me. We don't talk the way we used to." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "I know that feeling," I admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if Mark even sees me anymore. We used to be so in sync, and now, I don't know." That night we talked for hours. It wasn't flirtatious, it wasn't inappropriate, it was just two people feeling lost in their marriages, finding solace in each other's words. I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, I realize that was the beginning. That was the moment the line between right and wrong started to blur. Over the next few months, Ryan and I kept in touch. We texted occasionally, nothing more than casual check-ins at first, but then the messages became longer, deeper. We started sharing more, leaning on each other in ways we probably shouldn't have. I told myself it was harmless, but deep down I knew it wasn't. We were just friends, two people who understood each other. But in reality, we were becoming something else entirely. One evening, Sophie called me. "Ryan's coming to our hometown for a few days," she said. "I have a work trip, so he'll be staying at Mom and Dad's place. You should meet up with him." I hesitated. By then, I already knew my feelings for Ryan had changed. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but deep down, I knew I wasn't just confiding in him anymore. I was looking forward to his texts, his calls, The way he understood me in a way I felt my husband no longer did. Meeting him in person felt dangerous, but I couldn't say no. The night we met, it was raining. We had planned to meet at a cafe, but as soon as I saw him, I knew this wasn't just a casual meeting. There was something in the way he looked at me, something in the way I felt when I was around him. It was as if we were both standing on the edge of something irreversible, and neither of us had the strength to step back. We talked for hours, just like we had that night in the backyard. We laughed, reminisced, and shared things we had never shared before. And then when it was time to leave, he reached for my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it sent 1,000 emotions rushing through me. I should have pulled away, I should have walked away, but I didn't. As I lay in bed that night, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. What was I doing? This was my brother's wife. This was wrong. And yet, for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I felt wanted. And that feeling was intoxicating. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that I realized my mistake and walked away. But the truth is, that moment was only the beginning. I wish I could say I stopped myself before things went too far, that I recognized the danger and pulled away. But once the line was crossed, even in the smallest way, there was no turning back. I kept telling myself it was harmless, that we were just talking, just confiding in each other, but deep down I knew better. After that night at the cafe, Ryan and I continued talking more often. The messages became longer, the conversations became deeper. What started as comfort turned into something else, something I didn't want to name. I would wait for his texts, feel my heart race whenever my phone buzzed. I told myself it was just because he understood me, because he was the only one who really saw me. But in reality, I was falling for him in a way I had no right to. Then things took another turn. A few weeks later, Sophie called me, her voice filled with excitement. "I have a surprise for you," she said. "Ryan has a work trip in your city next weekend, and I'm coming with him. We'll be staying at a hotel, but we have to spend time together, just like old times." My stomach twisted at her words. She had no idea what was going on. No idea that her husband and I had been talking in ways we shouldn't, and now she was coming here, bringing him with her. I should have felt relieved. Having her around would mean keeping my distance from Ryan, but instead, all I felt was panic. When they arrived, I forced myself to act normal. I hugged her, laughing and pretending nothing was wrong. Ryan and I barely exchanged glances, but I could feel the tension between us. Every time he looked at me, it was as if he wanted to say something, but he held back, and I did the same. That night, Sophie and I sat up late, talking about everything and nothing, just like we used to when we were younger. She told me about her job, about the new house they were planning to buy, about how she wished Ryan was home more often. I nodded, forcing a smile, feeling the weight of my own betrayal pressing down on me. I should have ended things then. I should have found a way to step back, to put distance between us before it was too late, but the truth was, it was already too late. The damage was already done. "I know he works a lot," Sophie admitted, "but sometimes I feel like we're just going through the motions. You know what I mean?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah," I said quietly, "I know exactly what you mean." I hated myself in that moment. Here she was, my brother's wife, trusting me with her thoughts, her worries about her marriage, and I was the very person betraying her. I told myself again that I needed to stop, that this had to end before it went too far. As the night wore on, Sophie fell asleep next to me on the couch. I sat there in the dim glow of the television, my heart pounding as I reached for my phone. A new message from Ryan lit up the screen. "Meet me tomorrow, just for a little while." I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the keyboard. I should have deleted it. I should have ignored it. But instead, I typed 3 simple words before hitting send. "I'll be there." And with that, there was no turning back. But the next day, when I was alone with Ryan for just a few minutes, all those thoughts vanished. "I can't do this," I whispered to him when Sophie was out of earshot. "We need to stop talking." His expression darkened. "Do you really want that?" I didn't answer, because the truth was, nothing happened that weekend. We didn't cross any more lines, didn't give Sophie any reason to suspect anything. But after they left, the messages started again. The emotions that had been brewing didn't disappear. If anything, the distance made it worse. And then something happened that changed everything. One evening, Mark came home late from work. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes more pronounced than usual. I barely looked up from my phone, too absorbed in a conversation with Ryan to notice my own husband's exhaustion. "What's going on with you?" Mark asked suddenly. I blinked up at him. "What do you mean?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You've been distant. You don't talk to me the way you used to. Whenever I try, you brush me off." He hesitated, then added, "Are you seeing someone?" His words sent a jolt through me. "What?" I forced a laugh. "Of course not. How can you even think that?" Mark studied me for a long moment. "Because I know what it looks like when someone checks out of a marriage." His voice was quieter now, almost sad. "And that's what you're doing." I wanted to deny it, to reassure him that everything was fine, but the truth was, he was right. I had checked out. My heart was no longer in our marriage, even if I hadn't physically done anything wrong. That night, I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. What was I doing? This wasn't just a mistake anymore. This was becoming something much worse. And for what? For a man who wasn't mine? For a love that could never be? I picked up my phone and opened my messages with Ryan. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I needed to end it. I needed to walk away before it was too late. But then another message popped up from him. "I need to see you." And just like that, I knew I wasn't strong enough to let go. Not yet. I wish I could say that I listened to my conscience, that I put my phone down and walked away. But I didn't. Instead, I stared at Ryan's message, my heart pounding, my mind racing with thoughts I shouldn't have been entertaining. "I need to see you." Those words felt heavier than they should have. They weren't just a casual request, they were a confession, a confirmation of everything we had been trying to deny. And despite every logical part of me screaming that this was wrong, I typed out my reply. The moment I hit send, I knew there was no going back. A few days later, we met in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city, away from familiar faces, away from prying eyes. As soon as I saw him, I felt that same pull, that same undeniable connection I had been trying to ignore. "This is wrong," I said as soon as I sat down, my voice barely above a whisper. Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know." "Then why are we here?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached across the table, his fingers brushing against mine. "Because we can't pretend anymore." A lump formed in my throat. He was right. We had crossed an invisible line long ago, and now we were just standing in the wreckage, pretending we could fix it. "I think about you all the time," Ryan admitted. "And I know I shouldn't, but I can't help it." My heart ached at his words because they mirrored my own thoughts exactly. Ryan, we're hurting people who don't deserve it. He nodded slowly. "I know." For a long time, we just sat there in silence, letting reality settle between us. We were two people who had found comfort in each other when our marriages felt empty. Two people who had crossed a line and now had no idea how to go back. "Do you love him?" Ryan finally asked. I looked away. Did I love Mark? He was my husband, the man I had built a life with. But love was supposed to feel alive, wasn't it? And whatever we had once had felt like it had faded into something cold and distant. "I don't know," I admitted. "And I don't know if Sophie and I are still right for each other," he said quietly. Those words scared me more than anything else. Because if he was questioning his marriage and I was questioning mine, what did that mean for us? We left the cafe without an answer, without a plan, just two broken people tangled in something they shouldn't be. And for weeks after that, I lived in that uncertainty. But then life decided for me. One evening, Mark came home early. I was in the kitchen, lost in thought, when he placed his phone on the counter beside me. "I need you to see something," he said, his voice calm, too calm. I looked down and felt the air leave my lungs. It was a screenshot, a message from Ryan. My message history with him. "I know everything," Mark said. "I've known for a while now." I felt dizzy. "Mark," he held up a hand. "Don't. Just tell me the truth. Do you love him?" The question hit me harder than I expected. Love? It had felt so intoxicating, so consuming when it was just stolen glances and whispered confessions. But now, faced with the harsh reality, I wasn't sure anymore. I don't know," I whispered. Mark let out a long breath. "Then we have nothing left to talk about." Just like that, my marriage was over. Not with a dramatic fight, not with yelling or accusations, but with quiet resignation. He had already let me go long before this moment. I just hadn't seen it. But the real heartbreak was yet to come. The next day, I got a call from Sophie. Her voice was shaking. "How could you?" Tears burned my eyes. "Sophie, I don't want your excuses," she snapped. "I trusted you. You were my sister and you took everything from me." I had no words to defend myself because she was right. Ryan and I had destroyed 2 marriages. But more than that, I had lost the one person who had always been there for me. and no amount of regret could undo that. In the end, Ryan and I didn't end up together. Whatever we had was built on loneliness and brokenness, not love. And when faced with the consequences of our choices, we both realized that we had mistaken comfort for something deeper. I lost my husband, I lost my sister, and worst of all, I lost the version of myself that I used to be, and that is something I will have to live with for the rest of my life. Life doesn't always give second chances. Some mistakes leave scars too deep to heal. Some betrayals can never be undone. I thought I had found something real with Ryan, but in the end, all I did was destroy the people who mattered most to me. Mark moved on. He deserved better, and I hope he found happiness without me. Sophie? She never spoke to me again. I don't blame her. I wouldn't have forgiven me either. As for Ryan, we drifted apart, realizing too late that what we had wasn't love. It was just an escape from the emptiness in our own lives. I live with my choices now. I wake up every day knowing that I can't rewrite the past, that I can't take back the hurt I caused. And that is my punishment, because no matter how much time passes, I will always be the woman who betrayed her own sister. And that's a truth I have to carry forever. This is my story, a story of choices, of consequences, and of loss. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that some mistakes cost you everything. If you're new here, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. It only takes a second, but it gives us the motivation to create more stories. So please like this video, and now let's begin the story. I never imagined I would find myself in this situation, sharing a story I never thought would be mine. I was the kind of woman who believed in love, in marriage, in the vows we take before our families and the world. I believed in a loyalty that should never waver, no matter the temptations life throws in our path. And yet here I am, unraveling the truth of how everything changed, how I changed, and how the boundaries I once thought unbreakable blurred into something I never expected. My name is Lauren. I have been married to Josh for 7 years. We met in college, one of those love stories that felt straight out of a novel. He was charming, intelligent, and kind, in ways that made me feel like I had found something rare and precious. We built a life together, one that looked perfect from the outside, a home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, careers that kept us busy but fulfilled, and a close-knit group of friends who felt like family. Among those friends was Noah. Noah had been a part of Josh's life long before I entered the picture. They had been best friends since high school, inseparable in ways that made me respect their bond. When I married Josh, I gained Noah as an extension of our life. He was always around, weekend cookouts, game nights, even quiet dinners where he would show up unexpectedly just to chat. I liked him, but he was always Josh's friend first. That was the line I never thought would be crossed. It started subtly, so subtly that I didn't even realize when the first shift happened. Maybe it was the way Noah listened to me when I spoke, his eyes holding onto my words longer than they should have. Maybe it was the way he noticed things, how I changed my hairstyle, how I looked tired after a long week, how I laughed less than I used to. Josh was a good husband, but he was busy. His work demanded long hours, and when he was home, he was often too exhausted to notice the little thing. I never held it against him. That was life. That was marriage. But Noah noticed. The first time I really felt something stir inside me was on an evening that should have been ordinary. Josh was out of town for work, and Noah had stopped by to return a book he had borrowed. I invited him in for a quick cup of coffee, thinking nothing of it. We sat in the living room, talking about everything and nothing, the way old friends do. But there was something different in the air that night, an unspoken tension that neither of us acknowledged, but both of us felt. It was the way his eyes lingered on me, the way he listened as if my words were the most important thing in the world. It was the way he laughed at my jokes, the kind of laughter that felt warm and genuine. And it was the way he said my name softly, as if it carried a meaning he hadn't realized before. It was the first time in a long time that I felt truly seen. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was nothing, that Noah was simply a good friend who cared. But as the days passed, I started noticing more. The way his presence made my heart beat a little faster, the way I looked forward to his texts, the way I found myself thinking about him when he wasn't around. It was dangerous and I knew it, but I didn't stop. I should have stepped back. As weeks went by, our interactions became more charged. A brush of hands when passing a coffee mug, a look that lingered too long, a moment of silence that spoke louder than words. The guilt crept in, slow but persistent, whispering that I was playing with fire. And yet, I didn't walk away. Not yet. One evening, Josh was working late, and Noah stopped by again. This time, there was no borrowed book, no real reason, just an excuse to check in. We sat on the couch, the room dimly lit, the air thick with something unspoken. My heart pounded in my chest as he reached for my hand, hesitating, searching my face for permission. In that moment, I had a choice. I could step away, end whatever this was before it became something more, or I could let it happen. I pulled my hand back, breaking the moment, breaking the spell. "Noah," I whispered, my voice barely steady. "We can't." He nodded, exhaling slowly. "I know," he said. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything that could have been, but never would be. Finally, he stood up, offering me a sad smile. I should go. I watched him walk out the door, knowing that whatever had been building between us had to end. I loved Josh. I had chosen him and I would choose him again, but as I sat there, alone in the quiet house, I couldn't ignore the truth. I had come closer to the edge than I ever thought possible. Some lines once blurred can never be unseen, and some temptations once felt never fully disappear. I should have created distance, but instead I let it continue, convincing myself that there was no harm in it. As long as nothing was said, as long as nothing was done, then it wasn't real. But emotions don't follow logic. They grow in the spaces we don't guard, in the moments we let linger longer than they should. And that's exactly what happened. One evening, Josh had invited Noah over to watch a game. It was one of their traditions, something they had done for years. I was in the kitchen preparing snacks when Noah walked in. For a brief moment, it was just the two of us, the sound of the television murmuring in the background. He leaned against the counter watching me, and for a second neither of us spoke. Then he broke the silence, his voice quieter than usual. "You're different lately." I looked up at him, forcing a small smile.